where else we then, and how do we go about getting Forex to import milk, right? So I think it's a bit of both, right? But I think in terms of
so technically it's a ban.
Technically it's not. So that's my take.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nonso Bikili, do you agree? Which is it? Is it a ban or is it not a ban?
Well, technically it's not a ban, but in practice it is a ban. Because it's not just that the companies can't buy Forex from the CBN, they also can't buy from banks or any other official sources. And these are companies with corporate governance rules that mean that you can't go to the black market and buy Forex. You can't go to the street and buy Forex in cash. You can't do that.
I see.
So even though the CBN says you can get Forex from wherever you want, in practice, it's a ban for this company because there's nowhere else for them to get Forex from.
Okay. Now, the CBN governor said that milk imports are worth $1.2 billion a year. Our own research points to about $330 million. Which figure is more accurate, Nonso?
Well, I think you need to understand how the CBN gets its own data. Its own data is from what people request to buy Forex for these commodities.
I see.
Whereas the MBS or the UN country data uses what actually comes into the country. And we know there's this potential that people will ask for more Forex than they require because they want to use Forex for other reasons. So if you want to import maybe $300 million worth of milk, then you ask for $600 million and then you use the balance to do something else. So there's that potential for inflation of the amount requested from the CBN, which will result in the CBN data looking extra large. So we don't import $1.2 billion worth of milk. We imported more than $1 billion only once in the last decade. I think that was in 2011 or 12. I can't remember.
Okay.
But in general, last year we did about 300 million, and it's been trending downwards. So we've been importing less and less milk officially since about 2012 or 2013.
Aghogho, is this an opinion you share?
Yes, and also if I may add, right, if even if we look at the 1.2 to 1.5 billion dollars that Governor Emefiele mentioned, that is still not a significant amount of our of our imports, right? Because that still comes up to 4 to 5%. So I think the insight behind you mentioning that figure still remains the same, right? Whether it is zero, whether we take the 300 million or the 1.2 billion dollars figure.
Okay.
And the question remains, right? Why this?
Why milk? So I'm guessing that Emefiele emphasized the figure to point out that milk is draining our Forex, right? But I did some more research, and the top 10 import items account for 77.6% of all imports, right? Milk is not one of them. Milk imports amount to less than 1% of national imports by dollar value. So isn't it a bit of a stretch to suggest that milk is a drain on our Forex, Aghogho?
By those statistics, indeed it would be, right? But then we also remember the other, the other quote from Governor Emefiele around milk being something that we can produce in Nigeria. So I think in addition to, the stated idea of, it being a drain, there's also the idea that this is a product that we should be substituting.
Growing at home.
Exactly. So the idea of import substitution comes in as well, beyond just protecting Forex.
I see. Yeah. So let me come to you. Is it a bit of a stretch to suggest that milk is a drain on our Forex?
Well, I tend to be at odds with the idea that importing is a drain on Forex, right?
Oh, importing, period.
If you import milk, you get the milk, right? It's not like somebody took your dollars and ran away. It's trade, right? You import milk, you get the milk, people eat the milk, people need proteins. So the idea that importing is a drain on Forex on its own, I think it's not particularly a good policy idea. But, like we said, milk is a very small fraction of our imports.
And now, our top imports are mineral fuels, including petrol, right?
Yeah, petrol is the big elephant in the room. And if you're being honest and you want to say you want to implement import substitution policies, then probably the thing you should start with first. We have crude oil. We have the knowledge to refine crude oil. It's not rocket science. We have the manpower to refine crude oil. We have the market for crude oil. So if you really thought that restricting imports would have an impact, then the first thing that should be on your list is fuel. But it's not. Right?
Especially because if you think about those mineral fuels, including petrol, they amount to about $10.8 billion a year, $10 billion a year. That's 39 times as much as milk. And the government is paying a big chunk of that in subsidy payments on petrol. So what's the rationale, Nonso, for defunding milk imports while keeping the fuel subsidy?
Well, I think we know that the fuel price is a political issue. And even though we know it's a bad way to spend money and it's a waste of resources, the government is in complete control of the fuel prices and they are always opposed to increasing it for whatever reason, right? So we know that is a reality of our politics. But at the same time, we know that we've had a lot of issues with herdsmen and farmers recently. And I mean, this is just speculation, I should make it clear. But I'm guessing the CBN thought that milk would appeal to that sensitivity of Nigerians that, look, we're trying to help with this key, social issue. And so I think that's one of the primary reasons why milk is the first on the list. Like I said, there's going to be, this is probably just like a first thing on the agenda. I'm sure that there will be more things to come. There has been 42 items before. This is the 43rd, or is it 44th? I don't even know.
Yeah, 43rd.
Yeah, but I'm guessing that milk was chosen because it's something that is in the political space now, and it's something that the CBN thought would have like an emotional appeal to people as a way to kind of limit the herdsmen farmer clashes.
How's that working out?
In his speech, that it's not just an economic issue; it's a social issue as well. Yeah.
Okay. Let me come to Aghogho. You were nodding very, frantically while he was talking. So you agree with a lot of his points?
Well, I agree that it is a possible, explanation. But I think the question remains, right? Because no clear, strategy and reason beyond the idea of saving Forex and also creating something that we can produce here has been given, right? So in terms of that, I agree that it is a possible reason, but we don't have a way of saying. And for me, it begs the question, right? What is the strategy behind this policy? Because when we look at this, it's almost as though it is putting, right, the cart before the horse, right? If for whatever reason, whether political, whether to address the herdsman issue and create wealth in that space for a certain demographic that has cows, even if that is the reason, right, which again is speculation, to be clear, even if that is the reason, there is still this, putting the cart before the horse, because what are the structures in place currently to actually ramp up and increase production of milk to make it competitive as well? Those are questions that we don't have the answers to.
But like I asked Nonso, I want to ask you as well. What do you think the rationale is for defunding milk while keeping the fuel subsidy?
Again, so what do I think? I can only speculate.
Okay.
Right?
Speculate away.
Well, speculation is a tricky situation, but yes, definitely this is possibly one. But I also wonder, right? Is there, are there other interests who are thinking of coming into the milk space that we don't know about, private interests? Again, we don't know, that are thinking of, starting, starting big milk production in the country and are then influencing the bank. That is a question as well, because that way, if there was some investor that was thinking of producing locally and has been able to create influence, then automatically they have some form of advantage.
Okay.
So it could be, again, this is another speculation, which we just don't have the answer.
Yeah, but isn't that what economics largely is? A lot of speculation, Nonso. Nonso, let me come to you. The CBN, and you mentioned it, the CBN gave, I think it was Aghogho that mentioned it actually, gave one of their reasons for this policy as an avenue, a way to boost domestic production of milk. The CBN says if milk imports reduce, the local producers will have a market, and this will incentivize investment in milk. Could you give us examples of industries where import restrictions have succeeded in growing domestic production?
The import substitution theories were kind of championed in the 70s and 80s, and for the most part, they failed. And it's not that you don't produce more. So in most cases, you will produce more.
Okay.
If you ban something or restrict something, you will produce more. But the loss from having to pay so much more for that product is typically greater than any kind of extra production. So if you think about, well, not to name names, but if you think about cement, for example, we do produce cement, a lot of cement, right? And that's a fact. That's a clear transmission of the import substitution policy. But then the cost is that we have the highest prices for cement in the world, and that has had consequences for infrastructure, for construction industry, and those costs are theoretically larger than any kind of benefits of extra production. And so you can see why it's appealing to politicians, right? Because there's the real opportunity that you can channel profits to a particular company, and those profits are very real. And in many cases, they will produce more. But society as a whole loses because you incorporate inefficient processes, you incorporate high prices, and the consumers eventually have to pay much, much more than they would have paid if they could just import it or if it was produced in a competitive manner.
So basically, we're saying that restricting imports usually doesn't grow domestic production. I mean, so for instance, you have producers who have who are what I call a captive market. I mean, they don't have to be efficient. They often raise their prices. They don't have competition. And it's kind of difficult to see that being the outcome that the government intends when it bans imports, right? Or when it restricts imports, no so?
Well, if you add politics to economics, then it's a very natural outcome, right? If you have the opportunity to channel profits to a particular business or a particular firm, then politically that makes sense, right? Especially if the opposition is foreign, right? Because importers have less rights. Importers don't vote. Foreign firms don't vote, but domestic firms have potential for voting, for influencing the public, and all that. And so, there's a very real political background to this, where if you're connected with government, then you can get government to ban your competition, which will drive profits to you. You may or may not produce more, but that's not the point. The point is society as a whole loses because the cost of doing that is much greater than whatever extra production that whatever extra you produce, right? And if you take the inequality angle into account, people who consume milk aren't just rich individuals. Everybody from the malams on the streets down to people in Ikoyi, all consume milk, right? It's maybe not a similar amount, but mostly all consume milk. But who produces milk, right? It's not the guy on the streets. It's not, and people think that it's going to be the random herdsmen who have 3 or 4 cows. It's not them, because they're not net surplus producers of milk. They produce milk, yes, but they consume just as much milk as they produce. So the only real benefactors are going to be the large producers. And you can't argue to channel resources away from everyday people into the hands of large producers, even if they do produce a little bit more. It's not a good argument to make. Right?
You were nodding along when he was talking, Aghogho. You have thoughts on some of the points he's raised?
No, so I mean that feeds into like the one speculation I had, right?
Yes,
which is what is the possible reason? Is there an interest that is being served here that we just don't know yet, a private interest that is being served that we just don't know about yet. So that's why I was nodding vigorously. But I have to say too, kind of piggyback off of what you said, and also that, right? If we're thinking of politics and economics, then yes, it can make sense. But if we're going to think about economics alone, then a more successful way of driving economic growth, than import substitution is to look at really expanding your exports, right? And putting effort into that. Why? Because what that does is that it drives the local economy or the local production of that particular good or crop to be competitive on the world stage, right? And it has labor productivity results, right? Whereas, as Nelson just mentioned, when you focus then on import substitution, right, productivity can be challenged because the few people that can compete large scale are not as driven to be cost effective, right? So on a purely economic, scale, then we should be looking at how do we export more, right, as opposed to how do we import less.
Can I ask Aghogho though, are there examples where restricting imports has made local production worse?
Worse in recent history, none that I can think of at this point. Because we even see rice, right? It has trended upward, but maybe not in.
None. So, are there examples where restricting imports has made local production worse?
Yes. Well, you have to go back to the 80s, right? There was a period where, just a good example, a minister got the government to ban shoe imports because he had a shoe factory. And it was successful for a few years, but once there was the economic turbulence of the 80s, and once people figured out how to smuggle shoes into the country, then the little shoe manufacturing industry that we had just collapsed because they couldn't compete at all. Right? So the thing we need to keep in mind is that the rest of the world isn't standing still waiting for us to become more productive. They are becoming more productive all the time. And as they become more productive, the price differentials between our protected markets and international markets increase, and that increases the opportunity for smuggling and things like that. And once people figure out how to smuggle, once people figure out that they can move shoes from Benin Republic to Lagos at night, then your local industry kind of can't compete anymore, even including the protections. So that's a summary of what happened to the textile industry, right? Textile industry had lots of protection in the 60s and 70s. But once people figured out how to smuggle textiles into the country, because of the large price differentials, even that protected industry collapsed. It still hasn't recovered till today. So if you think of things from a dynamic perspective, you can protect some things, but the world isn't standing still waiting for you to, get better. They're getting better all the time. Yeah. And the better the world gets, the bigger the spread, the larger the spread between world prices and your domestic prices, even with your protections. And the larger the likelihood that people would just figure out an alternative way to bring this stuff in through the bush.
Yeah. But
Go ahead.
If I may, I mean, this is a question, and I know you're
yes,
the
host,
of course, right? But I think I totally agree with you, So, but a question then came up for me, which is, yes, the world is not standing still, and we need to increase efficiency to compete globally. However, then you have a situation where, because the world is not standing still, and because you're not building, say, capacity in a particular industry and you can't, right, at the same rate at which someone who is light years ahead of you is doing so, right? What space is there for rapidly becoming an export champion when you're far behind, for example? So this is just a reflection of mine. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, people tend to focus on what we import, but we're not that far behind in many aspects. So, in terms of labor costs, for example, our industrial base in Lagos and Ogun State is still much more expensive than most of South Asia. So, just in terms of labor competitiveness, we are not a competitive region. And that's mostly to do with our historical practice of overvaluing our exchange rates, which is a problem on its own.
Okay.
In terms of skills, we are far behind, but we are not so behind that the catching up is insurmountable. We've seen places like Ethiopia, Kenya develop skills in basic manufacturing over a decade, which is not a long time. But I was vigorously nodding my head when you said we need to focus on exports, because I completely agree with you. A trade problem. Our imports look very normal. The distribution of imports across goods is very normal. It looks like every other country. The big problem is that our exports are only crude oil. I think crude oil and natural gas still account for 98% of all our exports, and that's where the problem is. And it's a different thing trying to export versus trying to stop imports. They are two completely different things. They require two completely different sets of policies. They require different agendas. And so far, not just from the CBN, but from government in general, we've been focusing on how do we stop imports, how do we stop rice, how do we become self-sufficient, when that isn't even the policy challenge. The policy challenge is how do we diversify our exports, and how do we begin to produce things that are more valuable.
Yeah. But let me ask both of you, though, if import restriction doesn't work, why does administration after administration insist on trying it? I'll start with you, Nonso.
It's politically popular. Due to our history, we have a big collection of adults now that were kind of trained and raised in the socialists, under the Socialist Manifesto, where government decides what you do, government protects, and you can, basically the import substitution manifesto is rife among our current set of adults, simply because of history. If you went to school in the 70s or in the 80s, you would be in your prime now, but you probably would have been trained in that Soviet-style organized production kind of mentality. And so it's still there. And so because of that, it's still very appealing to most Nigerians. When you say,
ban this one,
imports are bad, it's straight from that mentality, right? That if you import, you're somehow losing, and that you need to protect yourself from the evil capitalist world that is trying to rip you off by making you not do anything. So that mentality is kind of there, and because it's there, it's very popular. If you take a sample of people who think that banning rice is a good thing, you'll probably get a majority that believe that banning rice is a good thing, when in practice it may not be so.
Let me ask you the same thing, Aghogho. Why do you think administration after administration continues to do this, even though there's proof that it doesn't work?
Yeah, I think I agree with Nonso, and I will add on to it, right, and say that it is also, it's also maybe, how do I put this? It is also a lack of comprehension that import substitution, right? When you think of that phrase, substituting imports, right? Substituting imports with what? Local production can also be achieved.
Now, substituting is also replacing, right? Because I like to break down these terms for my listener, right? So instead of importing, let's produce locally. That's what you mean by substituting imports, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But that, I guess, replacing is one way. But if we can also achieve kind of similar results to what that can achieve by focusing on exports. And why is that, right? Because ultimately, if you're, say, very strategic about partnering with, people that have figured out high efficiency production metrics and ways of doing things, say in milk, for example, with Friesland Campina, partnering with them to say, okay, how do we, over the period of time, increase the local capacity to produce milk, right? What you ultimately will get, even without restricting Forex for milk, is the fact that as things get more and more cost effective locally, it will be beneficial to then use those local inputs or local outputs, right? Which would then achieve what? Import substitution. But this is without, right, going ahead to say, okay, let's restrict the amount of imports that comes in. So in terms of like a long-term kind of or longer-term strategic move, right, you can get to the same results of increasing production, increasing jobs, without that kind of policy-driven, I would say, cart before the horse.
But perhaps perhaps we have an ideological problem that we have to face head on. I mean, do we believe in markets or do we believe in state control of the economy? Let me ask you, Nonso, is there some sort of ideological angle at play? Is that what you were referring to when you were talking about the socialist, communist, styles, right? Do our leaders lean more towards state control over the economy than free markets?
Yeah, I think on average we lean more towards state control. And if you just read the manifestos of any of the large influential institutions, whether it's the NLC or any of those, it's filled with pseudo-communist language, right? And so it's clear that, on average, at least in government and in decision-making circles, we lean towards state control. But I think Nigerians are very interesting, and this is the way my friend describes it, that we are capitalists for the things that we sell, but we are communists for the things that we want. Right? Okay. So for the things that we make, we want to set our own prices, but for the things that we buy, we want government to set the prices.
Okay.
So, we're complicated. Yeah, but I think on a basic level, we tend to not respect the rights of people to do what they want with their own property.
Okay.
And we have a very collective ownership mindset where, if I produce milk, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the community. Which doesn't fit in very well with the idea of capitalism or markets, right?
Is this something you agree with?
I don't. I think markets are a very efficient way to allocate resources.
No, I was asking Ojugo. I'm going to come back to you now. So hold that thought. I'll come back so you finish it. But Ojugo, is this something you agree with?
It is a plausible explanation. I can't, I'm thinking about it. It's a very interesting way of looking at things and how we react definitely to our economy.
Okay, so let me come back to Nonso so he finishes that thought. Is that something you agree with?
Well, I think markets are a good way, a current best way to allocate most resources. Not everything. You can't have markets for everything. But I think markets are a good way to allocate resources. I think that markets need rules, like everything else, and the rules are important in making sure that the markets work efficiently. But I think on a fundamental level, we need to start to think about what rights people have. Do I have the right to take my dollars to buy milk from Ghana?
Okay.
It's a very simple thing, right? Why should I be forced to buy milk from Adamawa and not Ghana? What's the logic behind that? So if it's your money and you want to use your Forex to buy milk from anywhere, or you want to not buy milk, it's a free world, it's a free country, do what you like. But why should I be stopped from using my own Forex to buy X or Y? Why should I be stopped from selling my Forex to a bank and not to BDC? These are the questions about property rights, right? Do I have the right to do what I want with my own property, or is someone going to tell me what to do? And we see this kind of appropriation of people's rights in many policies, especially recently with the CBN. Say, you can't sell Forex to X, you can't sell Forex to Y because we said so. You can't loan to industry X, you must loan to industry Y because we said so. It's a question of who has the rights to decide what to do with their own property. And it's a question that we haven't really answered as a country. Right?
You're still listening to Hard Facts. This is 99.3 Nigeria Info. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili, and you just heard the voice of the lead economist for Business Day newspaper, Nonso Bekili. I also have in the studio with me Budget IT's research lead. Her name is Ojugo Ude. Not Budget IT, Budget. Budget. They are in big data, and they provide a lot of the data that I'm always sharing with you on Hard Facts. And we're talking about this plan, this CBN's announcement that it's going to put milk on the list of items that will not get Forex for imports. And we want to find out basically if it's going to stimulate local milk production, as the CBN says. Is it going to help our Forex position? What could be the fallouts? Given the numbers that I shared with you when I started the show, what could be the fallouts? What could be the results if this thing were to work? And that's where we're moving this conversation to next. What if this thing actually works? That's going to continue after this break. Don't go away.
Hard Facts will be right back.
Hello, Nigeria.
Hey, guys.
What's good? Anyways, your favorite duo, Deals Plug, we're here again. And of course, you know that every time we come on air, we definitely have something amazing for you. And this time, I am
Hello, Lagos. You're still listening to Hard Facts on 99.3 Nigeria Info. And we're talking about the central bank's announcement that it's putting milk on the list of items that will not get Forex for imports. And I've been talking with Nonso Obikili, who is the lead economist for Business Day newspaper, as well as the research lead for budget. Her name is Aghogho Uche. And we've been talking about a bunch of things. And I said that after the break, we'll change directions for a bit. Let's for a moment assume that this can work, that this imports restriction will access to Forex restriction will make things in the milk sector work. Let's assume that the people will indeed invest in local milk production and try to grow the sector. What are, Nonso, technical and practical challenges that our milk industry faces?
Well, there are many. But I think just to say something before we get there, I think there's been a decent amount of investment in the dairy space recently.
Okay.
So it's not like we haven't been doing anything as a country. There's been people making investments in dairy production. There's a big plant that opened in Kaduna, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago.
Okay.
The dairy farm in Jos expanded. And I think there's an investment in Ekiti. So people are making investments in dairy space. So it's not that we're going from zero to something. There is already investment happening. But the big challenge as of today is twofold. First, there is no cold chain infrastructure. And so it's difficult to move products around the country. And secondly, the production of the cow ownership is still very segregated, right? You still have lots of farmers owning small cows, and so there's no aggregation process to kind of harness milk from multiple sources.
And we mostly have the wrong breed of cattle for milk production anyway.
Yeah, that's a biological thing too. We have a wrong breed of cattle, so that doesn't help us. Yeah, so those are challenges. Those are not things that you can fix with just banning milk, right? They are things that you build slowly over time.
Yeah, and just to add on to that as well, right? We've already mentioned some of the challenges. If we look particularly at, those that have cattle and headsmen, let's say, moving around, and also communities where there are a lot of people with cows of their own. Again, they disaggregated the ownership. What we see in those spaces is that yes, in recent times too, fortunately, there has also been moves towards addressing some of those issues in terms of dairy development programs and projects. However, that is just a sliver of what needs to be done for those value chains to become, and for those production parts to become competitive, right? Because when you have so many people owning cattle, right, the cost structure is higher, right? Because then in terms of how do you go about collecting, right, collating, the logistics just increase, which means the costs also go up, right? So again, dealing with all that while also dealing with the challenge, like Nonso mentioned, of cold storage, right, as well as the challenge of feed, the challenge of quality feed that can produce milk, the challenge of low yields borne by
the wrong breed. Because
when you have all those things, ultimately what we are facing right now in these dairy development projects are, slow incremental progress, but still cost uncompetitive production. Because
if we think about just the cows alone, most of our domestic breeds are better suited to a meat production than milk. The immediate past agriculture minister Oboh said our cows yield about 1 liter a day. Right? For comparison, the UK average is 22 liters a day, with a peak of 60 liters a day. So it takes 20 to 60 Nigerian cows to give the milk of one British cow. Now, when this milk issue came up, unfortunately, Nonso, the call to Nonso broke. So I'm guessing that our team is doing all they can to bring him back on the phone. But when this milk issue came up, Aghogho, we often hear the term backward integration, right? The CBN has been asking the milk importers to engage in backward integration for years. What is backward integration? How would it work for milk?
Yeah. So backward integration is then going to, right, this larger base of disaggregated cattle owners and bringing them into the value chain, right, into your supply base, right, to replace some of your milk production, right. And as I've mentioned, there's some dairy development programs that have also begun, whether it's in Kano, in Oyo, that are making strides. So that is that is what it is, and that is what is already happening. But again, right, ultimately, because of the statistics you've mentioned, because of the increased necessary cost of logistics, because of the power issues, that means that you have to be solving for cold storage. You have to be solving for even water, right? Water production, forcing people to invest in solar paneled pumps for clean. Because of all that, there's additional investment that has to happen, which means it's not a low hanging fruit, right? You have to invest extra to get this. So ultimately, you look at it and it's like, right now, right, it's not cost competitive, and basically these dairy development programs, yes, necessary for the long term, but one wonders right now, is it similar to CSR? Right?
So all of this heavy investment in livestock, land, to keep the livestock, electricity that you also talked about, because it's difficult to transport fresh milk over long distances without it spoiling. So it means the livestock has to be kept close to processing facilities, and the milk has to be processed very quickly. You think all of these are the reasons why importers have been unable or unwilling to conduct backward integration?
Yes, I think it is. And and a mix of both, right? I'll focus on Oboh, right? Because again, it comes down to cost. Ultimately, as a business, you want to make profit.
Yeah.
Right.
Last.
What is most cost efficient? If the local dairy production from a disaggregated base is more cost effective, nobody will be begging people to
do it. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But as we mentioned, there needs to be some investment to make it so.
Okay.
Or the setup of large farms like the one in Jos too.
Will the federal government's National Livestock Transformation Program, NLTP, would it not help mitigate some of these problems?
There are many things, right? We've mentioned it's not just the livestock, it's not just the
land.
There's the land, there's there's the feed portion of things as well. Does the feed have adequate nutrients that are needed for optimum health of cattle and therefore production of milk? So there are so many portions as well that need to be addressed, right? Or alternatively, having larger scale industrial production and rearing, as opposed to, but of course there's the trade-off, right? If that is the case, if you have kind of larger farms, then you don't necessarily have, say, the political benefits of this, which is including a wider range of people who already own and rear cattle into the value chain. So,
let me ask you a political question that may force you to speculate. I know how you hate to speculate. But there's been suggestions that this Forex restriction on milk is being pushed as a way to encourage adoption of the Ruga settlement policy. In what ways, if any, does suppressing milk imports make Ruga more appealing?
More appealing. So again, speculating.
Yeah.
So I think it could make it more appealing, right? And just vibe with me as well on
Okay,
this.
vibing with you.
Tell me if this makes sense.
Vibing
But
with you.
I would think, and I'm just speculating, that it makes it more appealing if settlements are geared towards production of milk, and so areas and pockets of regions where there are people who are, say, hostile, not as comfortable with having settlers in their region, who then have some security and some comfort in knowing, okay, these people are engaged in XYZ and in milk production that is also benefiting our community, that is also increasing, probably reducing the cost of our milk. Again, this is if it's all successful, reducing the cost of our milk. We know what the settlers are doing. There are records, we know employers. There is just more comfort in the knowledge of having a settlement where ultimately it's very tangible how that is contributing to the economic development of that zone as well. So again, speculation.
Yes. Now, what do you think are the dangers if this milk policy fails? What happens if local production doesn't rise to fill the gap that is left by restricted imports? What happens?
So I think Nelson mentioned this briefly as well. You have ultimately greater smuggling of milk products.
Let's not even talk about the malnutrition problem. That's number one first.
Right. So
smuggling
on different dimensions, which is one, right? Undermining your borders, undermining
your health,
undermining your border. Second one, undermining health access. Thirdly, as well, right? Increasing cost of living, for people who need and consume milk.
Let's bring you into the conversation now. How much milk do you buy and drink? Do you drink local milk or imported? I don't think I've ever drank local milk, to be very honest with you. Are you in support of the restrictions on Forex for milk imports? When we're talking nutrition here, we're talking about the fact that milk deficiency leads to stunting in children. Stunting is a slowing down of not only physical development, but also mental and intellectual. So again, are you in support of this, considering, what could happen if this fails? If this gap is not met by local production, are you in support? How much milk do you drink? How much milk do you buy? Do you drink local milk or foreign? We have Femi who's been trying to call into the show. Femi, how are you? Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, welcome.
Hi, Sandra. How are you? Good evening.
I'm very well. Good evening.
My name is Femi.
Yes.
Quite an interesting topic. In terms of support, I would think no.
Okay.
The reason this is based on the fact this is expensive. I've worked on the retail side and also worked with processor internationally.
Okay.
Internationally, and when I look at the infrastructure in all the countries that actually process milk, we are light years away. Okay, when you look at the cows in Nigeria, like has been said, average of 1 liter max you get in Nigeria is 5 liters. In New Zealand, for example, that is the highest producer of dairy, they deliver 33 liters per day. 33 liters per day. They have 5.5 million cows in New Zealand, higher than human population of 4.5.
Wow.
And they've been in dairy for years.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Nonso and the other Aghogho has said, and as this has been going on, it's very dynamic. They've been finding ways of increasing efficiencies in the value chain. And we are where they have the farms in the ranches in Nigeria. I've been to quite a few of them. They still substitute imported powder in their production. So the ban is like Aghogho has said, it's going to cost a lot of things. I mean, there's going to be malnutrition. We say that dairy products, milk, for example, is the cheapest source of nutrition. Okay, and that's why you find that it's introduced early into the life of the child. So there's a dairy politics which is driving this a lot. The dairy economics, you understand the dairy economics in terms proud of the fact that it's draining out of our dollars. But what of importation of fuel? It's even doing worse than that.
Mm-hmm.
Record shows that, like we said, yes, in terms of the size of the market, it's over $1 billion. But when you put it side by side petrol, you're spending so much money, dollar for dollar. You're spending so much dollars on importation of petrol. So I think we're putting
the cart before the horse again.
And then overall, let's even look at it from the standpoint of our competitive advantage. We are not competitively advantaged in dairy. So we have our cocoa, we have our granules, we have our palm oil, we have all of that. Let's put our investment there so that we can actually do that would dilute our dependence on crude oil from Forex to meet our Forex needs. We will see in about 6 months. I'm just predicting. I hope it's not, because one, there's going to be unemployment. The big dairy producers in Nigeria, those that actually use it for value, those that actually pack, and those that combine them for yogurts and stuff like that, it's going to cost a lot of. So we'll see what goes. We'll see what is going to happen.
We're going to see what happens. Femi, thank you for calling. You've been quite insightful. Raphael is our last call. Raphael, thanks for calling us.
Yes.
Good evening.
Thank you for picking my call. Yes. I am fully in support of the local production of milk. Yes. It's going to, create employment. I think people should stop playing, politics with what is going to help the future. You might suffer for a little bit, but I believe that this government is sincere. I'm a chef. I consume milk, both local and foreign milk. I buy milk every day. So I believe that if I should, patronize, let it be that I will go to market or shop and buy the one that is made in Nigeria. Which is very, very good.
All right, Raphael. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the show. Ojugo Uche, thank you so much for joining us on Hard Facts today. You want to respond to Raphael?
No, not a direct response, but to the questions about nutrition.
Can you do it in like 30 seconds? We're out of time.
Oh yes, a quick twist.
Okay.
Is that also a lot of people in Nigeria are actually lactose intolerant. So yes, I'm in support of us not having this restriction. However, it is also interesting to know that there are other sources of protein that we have, soybeans, right? That is also more suited to our, digestion.
So we miss milk is not that big a deal, huh?
I don't think so, but let's see. Yeah, that's just a twist at the end.
Okay, what a way to end the thing. Coming up at 6:30 after the news at 6 is a conversation with Ireti Doyle. Ireti Doyle will be talking to Ireti Bakare Yusuf on Listed Legosian Today. See, if you've never listened to Listed Legosian, today is a good day to start. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. This is Hard Facts signing out. Talk to me on Twitter. Twitter is S Ezekwesili. Facebook is Sandra Ezekwesili. Instagram is S Ezekwesili as well. SEZEKWESILI.
Hard Facts will be right back.